World War I transformed the airplane from a novelty into a war machine, and after the war left a glut of trained pilots in the United States who had little way to earn a living with their newfound skills. Many of them tried their luck, trying to impress the public with daring feats of aviation in flying circuses, or what has been called barnstorming. And barnstorming then offered a unique opportunity for women and minorities to break into the new field of aviation and earn a living. One of those women was Bessie Coleman, known in the air as Queen Bess or Brave Bessie. Her determination to shape the course of her life despite significant obstacles is history that deserves to be remembered. Elizabeth Bessie Coleman was born on January 26, 1892 in Atlanta, Texas, a small town near the state's border with Louisiana and Arkansas. She was the 10th child of 13 of George Coleman, who was part Cherokee, and Susan Coleman, who was African American. When she was 2, they moved to Waxahachie, Texas, near Dallas, where the family worked as sharecroppers. Bessie worked in the cotton fields at a young age and helped her family annually to harvest acorns. Her father hoped to escape Jim Crow by going to the Indian Territory in 1901, but her mother refused and stayed with the children in Texas. As a child, she is said to have promised to amount to something. Bessie proved to be a diligent student, completed 8 grades in a one-room schoolhouse. She attended the Missionary Baptist Church School from age 12 on a scholarship. She saved money to attend the Oklahoma Colored Agricultural and Normal University in Langston, Oklahoma, where she completed 1 term before her money ran out. She later moved to Chicago to live with her brother, and after she took a course in manicuring, she worked at the White Sox Barber Shop, owned by the trainer of Chicago's American League baseball team. In the book Queen Bess, Daredevil Aviator, Doris Rich recounts that in 1919, her brother showed up drunk one day and teased her about her job. He had served with the army in France during World War I and frequently told her that the women there had more opportunities. "Women ain't never gonna fly, not like those women I saw in France," he said. "That's it," Bessie replied. "You just called it for me." It was not simple for Bessie to earn her pilot license. She applied at almost every American school, but none of them were willing to teach a black and Native American woman to fly. Determined to fly, but unable to find a way to learn, Bessie turned her mind to France. There, black pilots had flown during World War I, and there were also licensed female pilots. There, she thought, neither her race nor her gender could stop her. Robert Sengstack Abbott, lawyer and publisher of the Chicago Defender, the most successful black-owned newspaper of the time, did some research and found that French flight schools remained more open-minded and encouraged her to go there. Abbott publicized Bessie's goals in his newspaper, and she was able to find financial backing. She also learned French and took a job managing a restaurant to earn money for the trip. She left for France on November 20th, 1920, aboard the SS Imperator. She was accepted at the School of Aviation of the brothers Caudron, managed by aviators and designers Gaston and René Caudron. She learned to fly in a 26-foot-long Newport 14 Type 82 in a 7-month course. Originally designed as a reconnaissance aircraft, wartime needs for its type of engine in SPAD 7 fighters meant few saw service. As a training aircraft, the Type 82 version was more common. The plane had 2 cockpits, one for the instructor and another behind it for the student. Had no steering wheel or brakes, just a large wooden stick and rudder. To stop once it landed, a metal skid dragged along the ground. She earned her international aviation license from the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale, becoming the first black person and the first Native American to do so, on June 15th, 1921. The training was not without its drama. While she was there, she witnessed an accident where another student was killed. "It was a terrible shock to my nerves, but I never lost them," she said. "I kept going." She returned to the U.S. in September of 1921, where she was met by interested reporters from air magazines and black newspapers. The Air Service News said she'd returned as a full-fledged aviatrix. She was front-page news in most black newspapers, and she said she intended to make flights in this country as an inspiration for people of her race to take up aviation. Her primary goal was to start an aviation school for African Americans in the United States. Despite her skills, she was still turned down for pilot jobs in commercial aviation, which there are of course few in 1921. Deciding that the only way that she would be able to earn a living as a pilot was to perform as a barnstormer, but feeling she needed to hone her skills, she returned to France in May of 1922. There she trained with German World War I ace Captain Keller and test-piloted planes in the Netherlands for the Dutch airplane manufacturer Anthony Fokker. She perfected many of the necessary skills for stunt piloting, such as figure eights, loops, strict climbs, and tailspins. When she returned in August of 1922, she had a lot of new credits to her name. European news articles spoke of foreign royalty entertaining her, and she had an article where Fokker praised her as the only American aviator who ever crossed the Kaiser's Palace at Potsdam. The New York Times declared she was considered by leading French and Dutch aviators as one of the best flyers they had ever seen. She flew her first air show on Labor Day 1922 in Garden City on Long Island with several other pilots. The show was in honor of the Harlem Hellfighters, one of the first African-American regiments sent to France during World War I. She dazzled the crowd with spirals and loops, and later aviation pioneer Hubert Fauntleroy Julian, known as the Black Eagle, parachuted from the wing of her plane. She finished by offering rides for $5 apiece, the equivalent of about $75 today. She was invited to star in the film Shadow and Sunshine, which was being produced by an African-American film company, but when she arrived on set, she found out that they intended for the first scene for her to be filmed in rags, so she refused. Biographer Doris Rich said that Bessie had no intention of perpetuating the derogatory image that most whites had of blacks. Her fame in the African-American community grew, and she was touted as the world's only black aviatrix. Her shows often had patriotic themes, and she continued to honor African-American regiments in her barnstorming career. Barnstorming pilots performed stunts alone or in groups as flying circuses, and the shows became hugely popular after World War I. Commercial jobs for pilots were limited, and for many performing tricks was the only way to earn a living as a pilot. Charles Foster Willard is considered the first barnstormer and is also credited as the first man to be shot down in an airplane when a farmer broke his propeller with a squirrel gun in June 1910. However, the performances wouldn't become popular until the 1920s. Barnstorming season ran from early spring until the harvest, when pilots would perform at county fairs. The shows often started with a plane flying over a rural town to attract attention, before landing at a local farm, where they would negotiate with the owner to use the field as a runway for the show. And that's where the term barnstorming comes from. They would then drop flyers over the town before performing. Sometimes a whole town would shut down to attend the air show. Afterward, pilots would offer rides for a fee. Though it was glamorous and exciting, it was not an easy way to make a living. Many pilots had to hold other jobs to stay afloat, and often offered rides in exchange for room and board. In addition to the basic tricks, pilots would fly through barns, while aerialists also did stunt parachuting, wing walking, and even mid-air transfers between planes. Some stunts even included playing tennis or doing target shooting while standing on the wings of the plane. Coleman loved her job. She said that the air is the only place free from prejudices. She was also a consummate showman and aware that the newspaper was her only way to sculpt public opinion and publicize her career. Throughout her career, she was guilty of telling many exaggerations and even outright falsehoods to dramatize her story, something she had in common with many of her contemporaries. Roscoe Turner, a speed pilot, regularly wore a lion tamer outfit when he performed and flew with his pet lion, Gilmore. She told one paper she had learned to fly volunteering for the Red Cross during the war, and regularly said she was 24, though she was 30 in 1922. The Chicago Defender worked tirelessly to promote her, calling her the world's greatest woman flyer. She bought her first plane, a surplus Curtiss J-4 Jenny, in February of 1923 in Los Angeles. Unfortunately, shortly after she bought it, the engine stalled after takeoff at an altitude of 300 feet. The plane nosedived and crashed, but she survived, with several broken ribs, a broken leg, and some serious lacerations. It took her 3 months to leave the hospital in L.A., and when she returned to Chicago, she did lectures at the YMCA to make ends meet. But she soon returned to barnstorming, including in 1925 a tour of the South. When she performed on June 19, 1925, the 60th anniversary of when Union troops entered Texas to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation, the Houston Informer said it was the first time the colored public of the South had been given the opportunity to fly. She refused to appear in any shows that denied attendance to blacks. She even returned to her hometown in Waxahachie. At another show in Wharton, Texas, a parachutist failed to show, and when the crowd began demanding their money back, she put on a parachute and performed the feat herself. During her time as a barnstormer, she also spoke at churches and anywhere else that would listen to her adventures and watch clips of her flying. She was happy to share her dreams of a flight school for African Americans, which she was always tirelessly working towards. She never did charge admission to students who heard her speak, knowing that they were the future of aviation. She stayed for a time with the Reverend Hezekiah Hill and his wife Viola in Orlando, Florida, where she opened a beauty shop with Viola for a time and saved extra money to buy her own plane. In the spring of 1926, she was invited to perform at the annual celebration of the Negro Welfare League on May 1st in Jacksonville, Florida. Edwin Beeman, a rich white man and sole heir of the Beeman Chewing Gum Company, was fascinated by flying and gave Bess the money for her final airplane payment. The money for the show and an accompanying speaking tour promised to help bring her dream of a flight school true. William D. Willis, a mechanic and pilot for the Curtiss Southwestern Airplane and Motor Company, flew Bessie's Jenny from Texas to Jacksonville, but found that the engine had been so poorly maintained that it could only manage 60 of its 90 horsepower, and had to make 2 extra stops to deal with engine problems. On April 29th, she drove to the airfield with John Batch, who was managing publicity for the upcoming show, and had been promised a ride in the plane after Coleman had finished the test flight. For the task, she asked Willis to pilot so she could look for a good place to jump for the show. She didn't put on her strap so she would be able to look out over the cockpit. At 3,000 feet, the plane went into a nosedive, and at 2,000 feet, it suddenly flipped over, tossing Bessie out. She died on impact. Willis fell with the plane and also died. Shortly after, while 2 police were trying to extract Willis's body, the distraught Batch lit a cigarette. Gasoline from the plane ignited, and the wreckage went up in flames. They later found that a loose wrench had gotten into the plane's controls and jammed them mid-air, causing the crash. Bessie Coleman never saw her dream of an African-American flight school come to fruition. But 3 years after her death, Lieutenant William J. Powell walked the last mile and established the Bessie Coleman Aero Club in Los Angeles. The group staged the first all-black air show in the United States on Labor Day, 1931, which was attended by 15,000 people. In his book Black Wings, which he dedicated to Coleman, Powell said that because of Bessie Coleman, we have overcome that which was worse than racial barriers. We have overcome the barriers within ourselves and dared to dream. Mae Jemison, the first African-American woman in space, said, "I point to Bessie Coleman and say, here is a woman, a being, who exemplifies and serves as a model for all humanity, the very definition of strength, dignity, courage, integrity, and beauty." When she died, Bessie Coleman was just 34 years old. Many mainstream newspapers didn't even mention her death. They focused on the death of Willis, who was white, but her death was front-page news on many black newspapers. Her body lay in state, both in Florida and Chicago, where journalist Ida B. Wells held a ceremony that was attended by 10,000 people. Bessie Coleman's name now adorns many streets near important airports like Chicago's O'Hare, Oakland International Airport, and Frankfurt International in Germany. In 2019, the New York Times published her obituary in part of their Overlooked series of obituaries for people whose original deaths had not been noted in the New York Times. While she never established her flight school, she inspired many people of all races to pursue careers in flight, including that of her nephew. And since 1931, it has been a tradition for black pilots to drop flowers over the grave of Bessie Coleman at Lincoln Cemetery in Chicago. While she died young, it is certain that she fulfilled her childhood vow. Bessie Coleman most certainly amounted to something. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy, short snippets of forgotten history between 10 and 15 minutes long. And if you did enjoy, please go ahead and click that thumbs up button. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes, please write those in the comment section. I will be happy to personally respond. Be sure to follow The History Guy on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and check out our merchandise on teespring.com. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you need to do is subscribe.